Hello everyone. On behalf of ANROWS, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Gambling Harm and Intimate Partner Violence. My name is Michelle Robinson and I'm the Director of Evidence to Action at ANROWS. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet across Australia, and on behalf of ANROWS, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Wherever we are today, we are on unceded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and I acknowledge and pay respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating and joining us in the webinar today. Today we are on day 15 of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This year's campaign is themed Orange the World: Fund, Respond, Prevent, Collect. The United Nations campaign explains the importance of the collection and analysis of data and evidence to improve services and programs to reduce violence against women. ANROWS' mission is to deliver relevant and translatable research evidence which drives policy and practice to reduce the levels of violence against women and their children. In line with this remit and the 16 Days of Activism campaign, I'm very pleased as Director of Evidence to Action at ANROWS and facilitator of this webinar to officially launch the practice guide, The Dangerous Combination of Gambling and Domestic and Family Violence Against Women. This guide has been funded through the ANROWS Research Fund to Reduce Violence Against Women, philanthropic Luke Batty legacy funding. To complement the ANROWS research project, The Relationship Between Gambling and Intimate Partner Violence Against Women, led by Professor Nerilee Hing, which investigated the gap in evidence and explores the impacts of both men's gambling and women's gambling and the intersection of intimate partner violence. I'd like to introduce our speakers on the panel today. We have with us Professor Nerilee Hing from the Central Queensland University and lead author of the report, Karina Freitag from Relationships Australia in South Australia and lead author of the practice guide. Anna Bardsley and Chandana Rao are our experts by experience of gambling and intimate partner violence and members of Three Sides of the Coin. Judy Avasar, who is the project coordinator, and Catherine Simmons, OAM, who is the artistic coordinator of Three Sides of the Coin, and Ginny Sulio, who is the Liquor and Gambling Commissioner for South Australia. This is a confronting topic and some participants may find it distressing. It is really important to take care of yourself while you are watching the webinar. And if you would like to access support, please contact any of the organisations listed on the screen in front of you, including 1800-RESPECT, Lifeline or Gambling Help. Today we have a different format from our usual webinar format. As an introduction to the topic, we're going to hear from members of Three Sides of the Coin, which is a project of Link Health, a community health service in Victoria that uses creative storytelling with people who've experienced gambling harm. Participants learn to theatrically express their journeys into their process of healing and recovery. Our experts by experience, Chandana and Anna, will share with us their storytelling videos, and in discussion with Judy and Catherine, they will tell us about their experiences of domestic and family violence and gambling harm. The audience will be invited to ask questions before we move on to the broader panel discussion. Welcome, Catherine and Judy, Anna and Chandana.
Well, hello, welcome to everyone. I'm the coordinator of the Three Sides of the Coin project and just want to very briefly introduce you to the project, to tell you that the project began about 10 years ago with as a story writing project that ended up in the publishing of a book, a little book, From Ruin to Recovery, edited by Arnold Zabel and forward by Tim Costello. And we were asked to showcase this book at the Melbourne Writers' Festival in 2013. And these people who had their personal anthology of writings was then with Catherine Simmons' directorship, they created a dramatized reading of the work and presented at the festival. And they were met with a standing ovation. And that put us on the journey of recognizing the power of story, the power of the lived experience in creating discussions and deepening understanding of the links between gambling and family violence, gambling and mental health. And so we've been on this journey of offering professional development sessions and to community through theatrical storytelling. And because of our limited time, I won't go on. I'll introduce Catherine, our artistic director, who received an OAM for her work this year. Catherine, thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Hello, everyone. So just very briefly, I work with people who are not actors, people, lives, their stories. I founded the Brunswick Women's Theatre back in 1992, which was a response to migrant women being retrenched from the textile industries. And I kept developing year after year performances with women who come together, share their stories. They become the actors of their own stories. And I reference that work because there wasn't one year that went by when I had women gathered together that domestic violence and sexual abuse was not part of the narrative. Sad to say. So that's been the reality. Jump cut, 30 years on, well, not more. I had 7 years ago, I started with Three Sides of the Coin, and we tell many stories. And in this space, particularly today, the relevance, we have Anna and we have Chandana here. And it's about discovering that story, that deep story, asking people what they want to say. I'm not the expert on anybody's experience. I'm the facilitator. So I ask people, really, what do you want to say if you thought somebody would listen? And in that journey and the building up of relationship, many things are revealed and stories are told, and then they're edited and created into performance. People don't come into this work because they want to act. They accidentally transform into advocates. So Chandana and Anna with us today are the advocates standing up against gambling and standing up for women in this space. So I think that's probably enough of a landscape to sketch it forward. What we're going to do in a moment is watch the videos. So we've produced 5-minute videos. We're going to first look at Chandana's, and that's been created from her performance. And then I'll ask you, the audience, to please take to the chat box and just a one-word response, what you feel, or a sentence or something that Chandana said that sticks in your mind, and I'll read it so we keep the space live and energetic, hearing from you, but I'll be the voice of you. But if you write the words, that'll be fantastic. Okay, all good? All right, moving forward. Let's watch Chandana's video. Thank you.
This is not the person I knew. He said to me, I would like to grow old with you. He was a friend. He called me Kuttima, little mother. He wanted me to be a typical Indian woman. Why do you need to work? Do you really need to work? You can take care of the house. Do you know my sister? She gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning. My mother does everything in the house. No office time vandirken. Enakku tired irukku samaikka kodada. I didn't think this was him. Drinking, every single day drinking. Wherever you go, you're drinking. How do I stop you drinking? We should just go away far from here. Let's go to California. Okay. What about India or Canada or Australia or somewhere else? I was just hoping things will just turn out better. Australia doesn't have a drinking culture. So I thought. We came to Australia with our 2-year-old daughter. We wanted to give her a good future, good education, more choices in life. We did get excellent jobs with very high salaries. Oh, fine. We are doing very well. We are trying to settle in. My daughter is doing really well. She's even started speaking in English, you know. My job is going really well. My husband, he's actually, he's at work. Yeah, he's doing really well. He's working very hard, you know. It's very hard to settle in this country. And we are getting there. Thank you. Let's open separate accounts in Australia, my husband said. I was earning well. I was paying for our rent, car, childcare. My husband was taking care of all our accounts online. We had over $100,000 in our foreign accounts. My husband, he's my husband is crying. We had only been in Australia for 8 months. He said, "Pano ellam poiduchu. I don't have anything in my accounts. Our foreign account, his account, our joint accounts, empty." Enna? Gambling? What do you mean you can't stop? What about our daughter? Should I leave or should I stay? What should I do? I am so sorry, sweetheart. Can't tell you a story today.
Please listen to me. He's drinking a lot. We've lost a lot of money. Please hear my side.
Who do I have in this country to help me? I don't want my daughter to. What if I lose my job? Just keep quiet. Don't say anything. Maybe he will change. Sweetheart, sit here. Mommy has to go in, okay? Play with the toys. I'll come soon. I'm applying for an intervention order against my husband.
What kind of a wife are you? You're going to the courts, to the police?
என்ன பொம்பள நீ வெக்கமால உனக்கு போலீஸ்க்கு போற கோர்ட்டுக்கு போற என்ன வெக்கமால உனக்கு
Aren't you ashamed of yourself?
my relative said it's your job, he'll change, if you are okay he'll be okay, but I was terrified of my future. Basically I didn't have confidence in myself. Slowly, with the support of the psychologist and the law enforcement, I got some new perspectives. Every time I came home and something else happened, why am I allowing this to happen? I have to leave him. The foundation of marriage is respect. We may call love and all of the other things. If your self-respect is not valued in a relationship, it's not worth it. I was protecting something which was already gone. To be honest, I did not understand what gambling was. Actually, I lied. I tried to hide my situation. You need to reach out for another person to support you. I wasn't ready for a long time. People who believed in me, they brought me out of my shell. I could believe in myself. Without that, I couldn't be where I am now. So, thank you, and I am grateful for those people to be present in my life. What is it that I want? My values had changed from making money and a good life to making a difference. I started going out, meeting other people who had gone through gambling issues and talking to them. When I come across women going through any issues, I tell them, speak up, talk to people, don't put a wall around you. Somebody will be able to help you. I've learned to let myself go, to not take things as seriously as I used to have some fun with my daughter. I always wanted to learn dance. I thought, I'm too old and I'm not good enough, I'm not young enough, but at this age I started learning Indian classical dance with a group of people who were 10-15 years younger to me. I had to to dance, I want to sing, I want to be happy.
Thank you, Chandana. Thank you. So audience, or those present today, please take to the chat box. Again, no right or wrong, just a word, a feeling or something that Chandana said that stays in your mind. And I'll read that out. I'm looking. Okay. Courageous, confusion, loss, and then a renewal of self. So powerful. I'm a lawyer, and this is so powerful. She's so courageous, brave and inspiring, beautiful and inspiring, empowered. Great. So Chandana is also with us here. So there's also now an opportunity for you to ask Chandana a question from the audience. So let's move to that. So I'll also wait for your questions. You can continue to put in your feeling, your comment, but also some questions. Do you want to say hi, Chandana, to everybody?
Hello, everyone. I'm Chandana, and I'm happy to answer any questions. No holds barred. You can ask anything.
Have you got any stories from unmarried diaspora women? Have we met anybody unmarried with gambling issues?
Actually, I haven't met many women from diverse cultural backgrounds at all. It's not that they don't have issues, but they don't come out into the public. Number one, first seek help, and even if they have gotten help, it's very rare that they come out and speak.
Here's a question: why did you know of the support so late? What is the issue here? Why the victims are not already aware of the support out there?
Excellent question. Now I got into my family got into the issue almost as soon as we came to Australia. Now, a family with a small child coming in, trying to settle down, we had n number of issues, settlement issues, getting a job, and managing our child. And even though communication was not an issue, we did not have the time, the energy, the resources to figure out what are the support systems here. And we didn't have the connections as well. So whom do we ask? We were in IT, so we were not connected with Centrelink, not-for-profits, libraries, anywhere where generally these services advertise. So there is no opportunity for people from our background, corporate, trying to settle in with a child to get exposed to the services.
So one final question probably before we move on to Anna's stories. Where did you go to seek help?
When I was going through the issues, I just pushed my husband to go seek a psychologist, because that's the only thing I knew at that point, which was not very helpful because she did not know much about gambling, or that he didn't reveal he was gambling. But after I separated, yes, the police helped me. Then I got an intervention order. I went to the courts. From there on, I was linked to many services, migrant-related, family violence, gambling, and I got a lot of help from there on.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chandana. I'm sure we've got the Q&A, the panel later, so we can unpack more. But let's move forward now. And now we'll watch Anna's video. And the same thing, please, audience, don't be shy. Take to the chat box and fill it up with your response. That'd be great. Thank you.
enough, never good enough, never good enough, never good enough.
Legs held her handle were piling up, one on top of the other until she couldn't breathe. I've got to get out of here.
You deserve a break. That's better. In the beginning, it was just a bit of fun. Which one of these buttons do I press? Night out with the girls. Oh, look, she's going to get it. Cheap and cheerful dinner and a flutter. She's going to get it. Oh, nearly. Wasn't a problem. We all knew how to walk away. $20 would last all night. Oh, that's better. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come inside. Feel free. Free coffee, free tea, free spins. Free parking, free rewards points, free spins, free spins, free spins, free spins. Free spins, free yourself, free yourself, free yourself. Free, lots of things. Free yourself, leave your troubles at the door. Can I get you, love? She remembered what I wanted. What can I get you, love? I'll be back. Who are you? How did I become you? Just stop it. Please. Please. Just stop. You don't have to say anything. The words are running on a loop inside my head. Stupid. Stupid loser. Can't be trusted. Why don't you just stop? Look at what you're doing. Nobody knows. It's a secret. I don't like that I'm lying to myself and to other people about where I am and what I'm doing. Where's the exit? My brain is on automatic. I don't remember driving in. Can somebody tell me where the exit is? How do you get out of here? I want my brain back. I want to stop. Pokies? You can do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5! Yes! I don't do that anymore. Free spit? No. Oh, there's a jackpot. Free drinks supply. No, I don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. But just one more. No. But no. I can do this. But it's not simple. I want it. God. How do you get help if you don't tell somebody? For years I walked past them, didn't even see them. Everybody takes a break and goes to the toilet and your brain works differently in there. I hope I can give up properly one day. God, the damn things are on every street corner. Just drive straight home. Shit, they're everywhere, aren't they? I've got to say the counselling helped a lot. You're doing really well. It's really hard what you're doing. Recovery, let's call it what it is, to be recovered from this addiction. I see the truth. What my kids missed out on. Because I wasn't there. If you yell at yourself, if you call yourself a loser, doesn't fix anything. You will not bully yourself. You'll find a way. Bring kindness. Now I have a choice. No more going to a venue for anything. Let's go somewhere else. I'm more than that person who went gambling. Who else am I? That's a good question. The writer, the traveller, the singer, speaking up when I have something to say. The harm that gambling had done to me was real. Why do I do this? Be so public? There are thousands of people out there like me who are too ashamed to speak up. When you're in the depths of shame of a gambling addiction, you don't tell anybody. You don't tell yourself how bad it is. This is not fun. It's supposed to be entertainment. This is not entertainment. It's time to change. It's time to change the language. It's time to change the culture. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. People often say to me, "You're so brave." I was brave to go into recovery. That's brave. Recovery isn't going back to who I was before. It's becoming the person I was always meant to be.
Thank you, Anna. And audience, please take to the chat box again, no right, no wrong, your feeling, your response, something Anna said, anything that sticks in your mind. There's already a few comments in here, so powerful and so very common. And this shows that willpower alone will not help. What was the impact on your children? Does talking to others about your challenges help you or reintroduce you to the trauma of what you went through? These are like very powerful. She's great. Disturbing statement. Shit, they're everywhere. One of the best descriptions of how the gambler views their situation and how they are going to escape the clutches of gambling. Amazing, giving others brilliant insight. So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Honest, moving, powerful, vulnerable. Thanks a lot, Anna, for sharing your story. It's good. It's great to hear from your audience. We all warm up. That's wonderful.
Questions.
And so there were a couple of questions in there. So we can go back to those, but please also, audience, put in your questions. And Anna, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for those very generous comments. Can you repeat the questions, Catherine, because I can't see them?
Sure. I'm just scrolling back in for a second. Does talking to others about your challenges help you or reintroduce you to the trauma of what you went through?
In the beginning, both. Now, not so much, although you can never deny, it can never not have happened. It is my story. It happened to me, like some of the other tough stuff in my life, and I choose to use it for purpose. The work, doing this theatre work, has helped to distill it so that I can see the parts of it that are useful and the others. But I don't need to tell it anymore for my own purpose. I tell it now because of the tens of thousands of other silenced people who are too ashamed to talk about gambling being harmful.
Anna, this question, why did you seek out gambling venues? Did you have anywhere else to go?
Because it was there, and it was the only thing that was open. Because I remember that one fateful night after a particularly bad argument with my now ex-husband, I just had to get out of the house, and I grabbed the keys and went for a drive and thought, well, where the hell do I go? There was nothing open. It was too late to visit a friend, and I was in too much of a distressed state. And I drove past one of the venues that I used to go to with my friends for a bit of fun. And I now can see that bit of fun that I had back in the years before, with the occasional visit, a few times a year. In the beginning, it was fun. Primed me for knowing what to do, for knowing that I could go into that venue and it's warm and safe, that women could be there on their own, and that it was open as long as I needed it to be open. And that first night that I went there on my own, it was the first time I'd been to the pokies on my own, the first time I'd been to a pub on my own, because that was not my life experience that I ever did that. And it worked. I went in there agitated, and the machine calmed me down. It did what it's designed to do. And the staff were friendly, what can I get you, love? And it wasn't long before I was going without any thought at all.
And it became a problem that first night, but I didn't know it at the time.
Thank you, Anna. So thank you so much. There's 2 questions for Chandana and for Anna. So now handing it back to you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And particularly thank you to Anna and Chandana. Very, very powerful. And thank you for your generosity in sharing and the work that you do as advocates in the area. And turning now to Nerilee, as you know, as Chandana's story has shown us, how gambling can be how a perpetrator's violence can be exacerbated by gambling. And Anna's story, which gives us insight into how gambling venues can be so very attractive to women experiencing coercive control, as they might be the only safe places around, as Anna has described. Nerilee, did you hear stories like this in your research? And what were your research findings?
Okay, well, thank you, Michelle, and hello to everyone out there. Look, yes, sadly, we heard many stories like this in our research. So the research, in the research, we conducted over 100 interviews with women who had been subjected to intimate partner violence, IPV, linked either to their own gambling or their male partner's gambling, and also with service practitioners who had assisted women in these circumstances. And I guess I'd just like, first of all, to take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt thank you to all the participants in this research who so generously shared their experiences with us. Excuse me. The overall aim of the research then was to examine the nature of the relationship between gambling and intimate partner violence against women. And we know that both IPV and harmful gambling are major problems in Australia. And we also know that harmful gambling at least triples the likelihood of violence in a relationship. But what was unique about the study that we've completed is it's been the first to examine male partner violence linked to gambling from a gendered perspective. And this is really important because we know that male violence against women is consistently predicted by expressions of gender inequality within relationships. So things like male dominance and a sense of entitlement over women, a perceived right to control a woman's behaviour, for example. Sorry, excuse me. So we recognise that to understand the role of gambling in intimate partner violence, we also needed to understand how gambling interacts with gendered drivers of violence in relationships. So I want to spend, I think I've only got about 5 minutes to summarise the key findings of what is a large report and a very complex report. So that's all been made available to you, and if you'd like more information, of course, you can turn to that. But just an overview of the key findings. So certainly the women in the study and the service practitioners reported horrendous and ongoing patterns of violence linked to gambling, including physical assault, psychological manipulation, stalking, rape, etc. I think what was really telling was that without exception, the women in the study described their male partner with words such as selfish, manipulative, misogynistic, entitled, and they described his behaviour, even apart from the gambling, as very controlling, really doing what he pleased and placing strict limits on the woman herself. So the gender drivers of violence were very, very apparent in the relationships as described by the women and also the service practitioners. They gave us examples of clients. Those gender drivers were very, very apparent. But more specific to gambling, of course, it was within that context that gambling made things just so much worse. So one type of situation which aligns with Chandana's experiences was where the male partner had a gambling problem. And in this situation, women reported that his gambling problem worsened over time. That was nearly always the case. But also, as that problem worsened, the frequency and severity of his violence also intensified. So one woman talked about her partner becoming angrier and angrier and descending into madness, as she put it, as his gambling problem worsened. So we know that symptoms of harmful gambling include preoccupation and withdrawal and cravings and strong urges and impaired control, and also chasing losses, gambling losses. And all of these were evident in the participants' accounts. So women described how their partner became completely preoccupied with gambling to the exclusion of the family's welfare and the elevation of his needs above all else. So this preoccupation was said to exacerbate his already, you know, selfish and entitled sort of tendencies that underpin that sort of gender inequality in the relationship. So when he was unable to gamble, for example, because of no money, cravings and urges to gamble then resulted in, you know, women described tension building, you know, his anger, that he would blame her and abuse her. And then after inevitable gambling losses, because you always inevitably lose if you gamble for long enough, these were followed by violent outbursts directed at the women as well. So one woman described this as a bad day of losses was always a bad day for us, and she was referring to herself and the children. And further, these women questioned his gambling or refused to give the partner money for gambling, violent backlash nearly always occurred. So there was this sort of longer-term trajectory of increased gambling and escalating violence over time, but within that were these sort of short-term cycles of violence that were directly linked to his gambling. And all of that occurred in a context of coercive control, which centred around his trying to ensure that he had the resources and the freedom to gamble. And I guess this was most apparent in financial abuse. So every single woman in the study whose partner gambled reported being financially abused by him. And I guess this shouldn't be surprising, given that it takes an awful lot of money to sustain heavy gambling. So $1,200 an hour, I've been told, you can lose on a poker machine if you play it at maximum speed, credits and lines. So look, there were many, many examples of financial abuse, you know, stealing from bank accounts, forging her signature on to acquire loans in her name, remortgaging the house. You know, I remember one woman telling us that she discovered her partner had redrawn $140,000 on the home loan. So there were just, sadly, lots of stories of those sorts of things. So the escalation of the gambling problem and the continued chasing of losses, which is also a symptom of a gambling addiction, meant that the gambling required more and more and more money. And very insidiously, violence and threats of violence were used to force women into providing money or for signing up for loans. And, you know, these women were left in poverty, in debt, terrified, but too impoverished to leave. So in other words, you know, this kept them trapped in a violent relationship. And for many of these women, the choice was to either stay or to be homeless with their children or in a refuge. So that was one type of situation. The second type of situation was where women were subjected to violence linked to their own gambling. So reflecting, I suppose, as we heard in Anna's story, these women in our study most often started gambling to physically or emotionally escape from their partner's violence. And women went to venues, as Anna has described, because they're some of the few places open at night, they provide relative safety and security. And a lot of these women were very socially isolated because of their experiences of violence. And venues provide that social interaction, and especially with staff, of course. And Anna's described the sort of emotional escape that the pokies provide. So women talked about, of course, being able to zone out when playing the pokies, becoming totally immersed in playing the pokies, and being able to set aside their anxieties and fears and worries. However, this was often short-lived, as male partners often responded to her gambling with further violence and used her gambling to justify their violence. So these women were in a relentless cycle of gambling and abuse, where the violence prompted further gambling by the woman, with the partner then responding to her gambling with more violence. So look, that's a really, really rapid run through of some findings. The study overall concluded that while gambling may not directly cause male partner violence on its own, where you have the gender drivers of violence present, gambling problems greatly intensify the frequency and severity of violence against women. So I hope that's given you a little taste of the findings of the study. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Nerilee. I think that's a great overview, and also speaks very much to the experiences of Chandana and Anna that they've shared with us today. So the research is very relevant for the domestic and family violence sector, for the gambling help services sector, the financial counselling services sector. I'd like to bring you in now, Karina. So as we're building capacity across the workforce is a key aim of the research. Can you tell us about the practice guide, which is a complement to the research and done afterwards? And can you talk us through what the practice guide recommends by way of change?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. And hello to everyone. Well, of course, the first and overarching aim of the practice guide is to bring what Nerilee has captured in a condensed and summarized version to workers across all human services. You know, knowledge is power. We need to know these things. In terms of recommendation, the first really important point is that in order to be able to respond constructively, we need to be aware of the full scope of the challenges that our clients are battling with. And as has been mentioned by both the lived experience speakers and by Nerilee, the major hurdle that we face is that, of course, these issues are still so stigmatized and instill so much shame in the people who experience them that they're often not in a position to disclose what's going on for them. So in asking hundreds of clients of Relationships Australia, South Australia, which means of disclosing are most doable for them, we learned to our surprise that 70% of our clients said that it's very helpful for them to be able to be asked in writing rather than verbally, that they found it easier when they had behavior-specific screens, that they were able to complete individually to disclose what was happening to them, rather than being verbally asked by a practitioner. So the practice guide makes a very strong case for universal screening. At Relationships Australia, South Australia, we use the DOORS, that's the Detection of Overall Risk Screen, which is freely available. It's downloadable on the internet free of charge, and comes in an app form. Of course, there are others, as long as it is, as long as it's universally applied, that's very important. So what that then means is that as we enter into the work with the clients, we have a pretty comprehensive overview of the kinds of challenges that our clients are facing, which Nerilee has summarized. So the practice guide, of course, unpacks these things, unpacks that those two kind of fundamental scenarios, if you like, in which the association between gambling harm and intimate partner violence can manifest, whereby it's either the person who uses violence who also gambles, or the non-violent partner who find themselves resorting to gambling as a means of living and surviving all of this. So the practice guide unpacks to some extent and tries to capture some patterns here and make some suggestions on how we can respond to this constructively. The most important point being that it's very important to understand these issues from a systemic point of view. And what that means is, we seek to empower human services workers to understand that a referral isn't always helpful or necessary, that these two issues are intrinsically interconnected, intertwined with each other, and they need to be understood in the context of each other, and they need to respond to in the context of each other. So, you know, for a gambling help service worker to refer on to DV or intimate partner violence counselling is not necessarily a useful thing to do. Having said that, and in the context of thinking about this systemically, of course, there are aspects of it where help from outside might absolutely need to be enrolled. You know, the first thing that springs to mind is, and I think you've alluded to that, Nerilee, that of course for children, for example, and the larger family system, all of this is an enormous problem to children first and foremost. You know, it is well known by now how incredibly damaging the witnessing or experiencing of domestic violence is for children. Add gambling to the mix, the accumulated stress, the potential financial deprivation that arises from that for children too. It's not hard to imagine how extremely injurious that is to children, and it's absolutely necessary to ensure that children are, it's facilitated for them to access to support around all of this, which if it's not available in-house, the referral will be very important. And of course, there are other aspects such as, you know, the legal aspect of it all, emergency accommodation, etc., lots of things where referral might be necessary, and that's part of skillful engagement with these difficulties to be able to facilitate that for clients. So we have a responsibility to be connected and be able to make referrals as necessary to make sure that clients are able to access all the support that they would benefit from. Most importantly, and Nerilee has alluded to that, of course, a particularly common problem that arises from the association between gambling harm and domestic violence is enormous financial fallout and enormous financial harms. So one section in the practice guideline is on the one hand designed to alert financial counsellors to some of the indicators that they might find in people's financial records and in the stories they tell that alert them to the fact that this, you know, that people are facing both of these problems. But also, of course, for other human services workers to be alert to the enormous financial risks that come to people who experience this combination, and to make referrals to financial counsellors. That's often very important for people to think about how best can I keep myself safe, or as safe as possible, financially safe that is, in this context. And last but not least, there's a section that addresses issues of intersectionality. So, you know, when we're working with particularly vulnerable populations, whether that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, women living remotely, older women or multicultural women, alerting us to some of the particular additional challenges that arise from these vulnerabilities that we would want to give consideration to when we're supporting women in these situations. So that's a very brief overview. For the more comprehensive idea, the document is attached. Thank you.
Thanks, Karina, and I think that really speaks to the, you know, the critical importance of an integrated systems response, both from a practice perspective and also from a policy perspective. And I think that's where we might go next, Nerilee. What did the evidence from the research or the recommendations tell us, and how do they inform any future policy change?
Our report makes numerous recommendations to reduce gambling problems and reduce domestic violence, and also to improve responses and support for women affected by these issues. So obviously we've been working with ANROWS on some of those, such as the practice guidelines you've just heard about from Karina, and raising awareness of the issues, such as through events like today. We don't have time to go through all the recommendations, but I'd like to focus on just a few that various stakeholder groups could implement to help reduce gambling-related violence amongst women. So look, reducing this violence clearly requires reducing harmful gambling. or gambling harm. So let's start by focusing on the gambling industry. It's possibly one of the hardest, most difficult sectors to get some change within. So some of this might be a bit of a wish list, but bear with me. So currently, there is no requirement, certainly in New South Wales and most jurisdictions in Australia, for venues or online gambling operators to intervene with patrons who are showing signs of gambling harm. So recent work that I led that was commissioned by the New South Wales government found that venues rarely intervene with patrons of concern. And women in our ANROWS study also reported that venues did nothing when they or their partner continued to gamble heavily. So venues do intervene if a patron, generally if a patron is aggressive or trying to borrow money, but not if a patron gambles all day or every day, makes multiple trips to the ATM, or even if partners come to the venue to complain. Look, I'm generalising here. I'm sure there are some venues that do step in, but the vast majority, from the research in New South Wales at least, indicates that they don't. So look, one recommendation made in both our ANROWS report and the New South Wales report is for mandatory interventions by gambling operators and refusal of service when patrons are showing signs of harmful gambling, accompanied by assistance to seek help, of course. So that approach occurs in alcohol service. So patrons now expect to be denied service if they drink too much. And we believe the same should occur in gambling, but of course it's critical to assist the person to seek professional help for their gambling as well. And look, I'm very happy to report that that requirement is now included in the draft New South Wales Gambling Harm Minimisation Bill, which our research informed. So let's see how that goes. Whether it comes to fruition remains to be seen. Look, our report also recommends a whole raft of other things that could reduce gambling harm. If you want to read a really good publication on that, you could look at Charles Livingston's work on that, where I think there were 99 recommendations he identified for ways to reduce gambling harm. You know, what we've focused on here is changes to the actual poker machine, so then not as addictive, and to limit losses. I mean, do we really need machines where you can lose $1,200 an hour? I'd suggest not. We also recommended reduced accessibility and advertising of gambling, because our research participants told us that they were triggers and enablers, I guess, of either the woman's gambling or the partner's gambling, and improved tools for customers to self-limit their gambling. So pre-commitment systems that absolutely work, where, you know, when you're before you get in front of a poker machine, you can set a limit on what you want to spend, and that's all you'll be able to spend, instead of you know, chasing your losses once you're faced with that machine, which is easy to do. We certainly got a strong recommendation in there for training for venue personnel in DV awareness and active bystander responses, and developing venue protocols for dealing with threats to women's safety, including information and referrals for DV support. Look, I have to say that gambling reform, I've been working in this space for 25 years or probably more. Gambling reform has proved to be a slow process because of the amount of money it generates for governments and industry. But look, some advances have been made in online wagering and are proposed for EGM venues in New South Wales, and we'll continue to keep the pressure up. Another set of recommendations I'd like to mention is for financial institutions. So clearly the link between gambling and financial abuse was very, very obvious from the research. And so we lodged a submission actually to the Australian Banking Association. They had a community consultation on should credit cards be allowed for gambling. We could have just had a one-word submission that said no, but we thought it was an opportunity to share some findings with them and some recommendations. So we certainly recommended that not allowing the use of credit cards for gambling. And I'm told that that's a fairly easy thing for them to do by just blocking the associated merchant codes, or the merchant codes associated with gambling operators. More responsible lending rather than less, so ensuring that loans, including credit card debt, are extended only to people who can afford to repay them. stronger protocols to prevent fraudulent financial practices, taking into account the possibility that financial abuse might be being perpetrated. I mean, some of the women in our research, shared stories of where they tried to get, the partner taken off not a joint account, but her account, for example, and, that took a long time or numerous phone calls. And again, training of staff in financial institutions so that they can recognise markers of harmful gambling and of domestic violence and financial abuse and respond to those at risk of financial destitution. There's also another one I'll just quickly focus on is creating alternative safe recreational spaces for women. So I think, as we've heard from Anna's story and many women in our research told us really the venues were the only place to go, particularly at night. So look, there's really a role, I think, for local governments in providing these spaces for women and consulting with communities to ensure that those spaces are appropriate and accessible. We've also got recommendations around community education on the link between gambling and domestic violence, and particularly financial abuse, which was very much an under-recognised area. And so there's roles for, state governments and federal governments, but also for gambling operators, banks, education providers, community services to provide information to customers on that topic as well. Last but not least, that I'll mention here is professional development on the topic as well to a range of professionals, including police, justice systems, venues, as we've mentioned, banks, etc. So I didn't have time here today to share findings on service responses to the women in our study, but we could sum it up by saying there's a lot of improvement needed, especially in the police and justice system, where gambling may be seen as a harmless hobby, and financial abuse is not well recognised. So look, they're some of the main recommendations, and we'll continue to work with various stakeholders to try and get them implemented. So wish us luck with that. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Nerilee. And Denny, to bring you in, thank you so much for your patience. Denny Sulio is the Liquor and Gambling Commissioner from South Australia. Denny, so we've heard from Nerilee on a range of different policy options and institutions, not only government. But can you tell us about what gambling harm minimisation policies have been implemented in South Australia? And how might the research recommendations discussed today be useful for future policy and programs in your remit?
Sure, and I really want to thank ANROWS for having me along to this session, and particularly Anna and Chandana in sharing your stories. And unfortunately, they are stories that we probably hear too often in my line of work. And it is incumbent on us to make sure that the industry is run properly, and as a regulator to implement solutions that actually help us manage those. So in South Australia, we have a few systems that aren't necessarily in other states, but are being looked at. So we were the first to bring in a third-party barring or exclusion process, and I think Tasmania has it, and now New South Wales are looking to implement that as well. But that allows a interested party, a child, a parent, a spouse, a help service to come to us and ask that a person be barred or excluded from being able to gamble. And that is confronting and challenging for someone to do, particularly for a spouse in a violent situation. So what we have from time to time is a family member or a spouse coming to us and saying, my husband is gambling a lot, and my wife's gambling a lot, and I think they should be excluded from that. What we have seen, and we go through a process there where we call that person in and say, this is the information that's been put to us. We get information from the venue to talk through the data around how much they're gambling and hear their side of the story. What that does and has created for some people is where, for example, a wife comes to us and says, I'm concerned about my husband's gambling, but if he finds out that I've come to you, then I'm in a risky, violent situation to deal with. So what we've done in those situations is found a way around it. We've gone to the venue and said, without disclosing that this has come from the wife, we've got concerns about this person's gambling. We want you to look at their gambling records and you bar them, rather than it being from us or from the spouse. So, and venues, when I come knocking on their door saying, we've got someone who's concerned about their spouse's gambling and concerned about domestic violence, you need to act, and they do. So they are responsive. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes me coming to knock on their door to do that, but it has meant that the spouse, the wife who's come to us, isn't then implicated in raising the issue, and it's protected them, and then they are barred from that venue. So that's proven, I think, to be supportive and helpful in achieving that. In South Australia, there is a requirement to intervene and have a conversation with someone where there is factors that indicate that there's people that are at risk of gambling-related harm. And in South Australia, we in fact about 5 years ago, introduced a system called the automated risk monitoring system, where venues have to be linked up to a monitoring system, and where a person has been playing a machine for a certain number of hours or spent a certain amount of dollars, an alert comes up to the venue operator, and they have to go and have a chat to that person about their gambling. And that, again, we can then go and check alerts versus their intervention records and see what's done. So that's another, I think Nerilee was touching on the fact that there's no obligation to do that in New South Wales, and we've certainly had that. The issue I've got with that process is, what does that intervention look like and what does it achieve? And there's some work that we need to do around that, because what we have seen and what some of my inquiries have found is that the venue operator, and what we're often dealing with is a 22, 23-year-old kid going up to a 65, 70-year-old person to talk about their gambling problems. So how do we train them? And we'll talk about that in a second. But what sometimes they end up doing is going and just saying, oh, you know, hi, how are you going? Are you going okay? Do you want a cup of coffee? And the person says, no, I'm fine, thanks, go away. And they count that as an intervention. But is that actually achieving an outcome? And what should they be doing, and what does good look like in relation to interventions? And I think that's really a piece of work that is being done but needs to be done more, to identify what does an intervention look like and what should it look like. And you know, what we don't see is, I might talk to you about your gambling issues, I might give you a card to engage with a help service, but as soon as you walk out the door, I've got no visibility of whether you actually engage with a help service or whether you've got some help or whether anything's come of that. So there is a disconnect between the venues and the help services that are trying to do the right thing, and we obviously engage with Corinna's group and others that try and assist people, and we work together with them. So help services can come to us and ask for someone to be barred when they've come and spoken to them, and we can work with it in that way. But I think there's an opportunity for venues and help services to work more closely, and you know, almost to the point of embedding someone in the venues, the larger venues, to say there's someone over here you can talk to, and how do we do that? So I think there's a lot we can learn from how to do things properly, but certainly in South Australia at least, we do have a couple of systems, one the third-party barring, the other the intervention requirement and the alert system to help doing that. We also have limits on things like ATMs. We've just introduced limits on FPOS withdrawals, so it's only $250 per day per card. So it does make people have to leave the venue if they want to get more money, and that gives them that break, hopefully, because some of the evidence we've obviously seen is people can sit there for hours and be in the trance that Anna talked about to not have that break, and how do we force that break is certainly some of the things that we're looking at. In relation to the research, and you know, I think it was very helpful from my point of view as a regulator to identify some of the issues. Some of them we've turned our mind to, some of them I hadn't, and some of the recommendations are certainly things that I'll look at for South Australia. So things like in the research, there's a reference to someone driving past a venue and seeing a large flashing pokey sign, for example, and that's something that I've started a conversation here in South Australia about. And we have what's called a gambling advisory council being established. It's going to do some work with us on policy. And one of the things I've asked them to look at is, I'm going to ask them to look at, is things like advertising and external signage, and what does that do to people and what does that mean? And this research is really good timing from that point of view to help inform that. So I'm grateful for it. But it is those sort of, you know, should we have sandwich boards out the front of places saying, you know, come and win a $10,000 jackpot or a flashing pokey sign, or should we just say venues have to manage how they advertise and get rid of those sort of things? And that's where I'm looking to head. Certainly the other aspects in relation to a review of our training requirements, and that's certainly something, having read that report and hearing from you, Nerilee, in relation to what training looks like. We don't have enough. So we look at our training looks at the indicators for potential people at risk of gambling harm, and that's, you know, people who are upset, looking dishevelled, angry, punching machine, crying, those sort of things. But there's not enough in there to identify issues around partner violence and domestic violence. And I think our training, and I'll need assistance in what that should look like and how to prescribe it. But that is another thing as part of our training review, having read this research and heard the stories today, is to look at what sort of initiatives should we put into the training, or what sort of components of the training that will help people in gaming venues to identify where there is someone who appears to be at risk of domestic violence. And what are some of the comments and things that people should be alert to when they're having those conversations about the interventions? And do you want to have a coffee? What are the sort of things that they should be asking and looking for as indicators to suggest there's more to this than just the gambling? And how do we work through that? The other thing we found with the exclusions is venues have an obligation to bar people in South Australia if they think they're at risk. And again, partly to Anna's story, when they decide to exclude someone or bar someone from the venue because they're concerned about their gambling habits, the person may seek a review of that decision and come to my office. And it is things like, it's the only escape I've got, I treat it as an escape, please don't exclude me, please don't bar me, because otherwise I'm at home. And there's some of the concerns that people have in relation to that. So the alternative safe environments discussion is really important, because people, you know, where we're in a situation where in society we've got people who are turning to gambling as an escape, there's significant risk in there. So it's something I think we need to look at.
Thank you so much. And of course, ANROWS would also be very interested in assisting you in the development of that training package, or offering advice on it, and what components in relation to domestic and family violence should be included. We are running out of time, so I thought I might just go straight to questions, but I just wanted to check in with both Chandana and Anna. In terms of, very briefly, was there anything that Dinny had raised that you wanted to make a comment on in terms of any of the policies or services that Dinny has explained operating in South Australia that, in your view, would be helpful?
I felt that, most of the things that you mentioned, I don't think they are, I haven't heard of them before. So I think they are fantastic as a affected other for having a little bit of control or say in getting that kind of help, of seeking help, and whether it's self-exclusion or in any other way. So I think that's a fantastic opportunity. With respect to children, I felt that I think what Nerilee mentioned, there is definitely a link even in my family where family violence directly has impacted, where my in-laws have been directly having impacted my husband's views on what is acceptable and not acceptable. So looking at that and services being aware of it would be great. Yeah.
Thanks, Chandana. Anna, did you want to make a comment?
I'd like to add the fact that while I was listening to you, Jenny, I was aware that it's very difficult for people who are disempowered by their family situation, by the violence they're living with, and then for me the added stigma and shame of having a gambling addiction. I had no voice at all. I had no capacity to ask for help. As far as the family violence section part of my life, I had no concept that it even existed. I just thought that it was my fault and that I just wasn't being a proper wife, and I had been raised to believe that it was my job to keep my husband happy. He thought it too, so we were a match made in heaven. And it was only after he left and after I found my way out of gambling that I had to then address all of that as well. And so
I would never have been able to come to your office and say, I need this space to do this. I don't know what the solution to that is, because it's very, very complex.
It is, and it is certainly difficult. I think that's, you know, where anyone in the discussions we have with help services is, if someone comes to you and they have a gambling help issue, the barrings in South Australia used to sit with the Independent Gambling Commission separately to my office, and we've merged. And they used to bring people in for an interview and talk about their gambling, and that was very confronting for people. They didn't want to relive it, they just wanted to be barred. I've moved away from that altogether. So now, if someone either goes to a gambling help service or rings up, we'll bar them over the phone. They don't have to come in and talk to anyone about why. I don't, you know, if someone comes to me and says, I want to be barred, I'm not going to question that for a second, and put them through some sort of discussion about why do you want to be barred. We're just saying get done, and make it easy and as less confronting as possible. Because what was happening before, someone would ring up, have the courage to ring up, and then they'd get an appointment in 3 days, and by then they'd lose the courage to do that. So we're saying as soon as you ring up, we'll talk you through it, and you're barred then. It's one phone call and you're done, because making that phone call is a really big step. I've been really conscious of that. So we've moved away from putting any hurdles in anyone, giving anyone a chance to think about it twice. If they want to, if they've made that call, let's just make it really easy, and that has worked.
Excellent. And the only other thing I'd like to just encourage you, if you haven't already thought of it, to include people with lived experience on your gambling advisory committee. There are people working in South Australia, because the voices aren't, it's not a balanced listening to voices. There are lots of professionals in the field, and there's space for that. Lots of bureaucrats and great people like you who care about it. But people with experience of gambling home will give a perspective that nobody else can give. And we're more than, we've done lots of other things in our lives, you know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And Karina, sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, not at all. If that's okay, Michelle, if I add something very briefly to that. I just wanted to add, because both Anna and Deanie have kind of alluded, I think what works well in South Australia from our perspective, and I hope that's your experience, Deanie, that really a one-size-fits-all regulatory process is difficult. You know, you talked about, Deanie, how you live the regulations and how you adapt them to fit each case. And that's been our experience. We work very closely with the interviewers from from Consumer Business Services, so Deanie's department. And what's worked best, I think, or what works best, what maybe stands the greatest chance, as you were saying, Anna, is for all of us to be alert, for all of us to work together, for all of us to be flexible, and to make the systems work. So I think, yeah, South Australia is a bit of a trailblazer there in that regard, and you know, we make the systems work for each situation rather than the other way around, and I think that's the most helpful approach to all of this.
Yeah, and I'd like to also make the point that the basic premise of poker machine gambling is that it's an addictive product. Let's not put all the blame on the user. Let's recognise that the control needs to be that the product is designed to addict. And I had no idea that I was engaging with an addictive product.
If I may add, I also wanted to mention that when it was mentioned, police officers and the courts need to be educated. But every day people come across or expose that they have been gambling to their GPs or accountants and so forth. So those people should be, you know, it's a prevention, it should be part of a prevention strategy to educate those people as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you.
I think a lot of people do go to a GP, so it's probably a part of our role to say, here's an option. If someone comes to you and talks about gambling, they can contact our office, and a couple of my barring officers are online today, I think, and you know, they are really keen to help people through that process.
And venue workers being exposed to lived experience, like Anna said, so they really know, you know, some of the symptoms and are able to understand. So it should be part of the training program that venue workers go through regularly, having an understanding through lived experienced people to see the symptoms in the people that they are, you know, seeing in their venue.
And self-care for venue workers. They themselves are harmed by gambling.
Sure.
Yeah. Watching even if they don't engage in it.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you all. And Jenny, one of the questions that have come through, and it's a theme, is where can people find more documented information about the measure you mentioned in terms of speaking directly to venues with respect to barring patrons? Is that on your website? Where is that readily available?
Yeah, so on my website, it's cbs.sa.gov.au, and I'm sure ANROWS can send that around to people, but that has a fair bit of information around there. And what we have is we've now introduced a system where if I go to a venue to be barred, I can ask them to bar me from all the other venues, and that comes to my office to do that. So you don't then have to go shopping around to 5 different venues to get barred. So those sort of things are all, and all the information's on our website.
Okay. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to throw this to you, both to Nerilee and Karina. What's the correlation between gambling, alcohol and other drugs and family violence? And we'll just close on this, I think, and the whole panel can have a brief response. We'll start with you, Nerilee.
Sure. Look, I can't give you an exact figure on the correlation, but we do know that alcohol and some types of drugs reinforce family violence independently of any gambling. I mean, Karina can probably speak to that better than me, but we also know that alcohol and some types of drugs, particularly ice and others, I'm sure, intensify gambling. And they do that through lowering inhibitions. You know, the person has, when they're affected by alcohol or drugs, has less immediate concern for the consequences of their action. And so, you know, it's not surprising to know that, you know, people tend to gamble more when they're affected by alcohol and some drugs, and tend to take, you know, place riskier bets and gamble for them longer than they might have intended, and all those sorts of things. So alcohol and drug use can exacerbate family violence just on its own, but it can also exacerbate the gambling problem, which in turn increases the frequency and severity of DV via the mechanisms that we've discussed today. So some of the women in our study described alcohol and drug fueled incidents of violence after their partner had lost at gambling. So you add the anger, frustration, the violence associated with gambling losses, then you add the effect of alcohol and drugs to that, and obviously it's not a great result. So the other thing I'd point out too was that some of the women in our study reported going gambling, specifically going to gambling venues, when their partner had been drinking, because they expected that he was much more likely to be violent, and that expectation was based on their own experience, of course, and they were seeking a safe space away from that. So I'm sorry I can't give you any sort of direct figures, but just the link between them.
It was what if any, wasn't necessarily a statistical result. And Karina, would you have anything different to say from what Nerilee said?
No, I would just affirm everything that Nerilee said. You know, alcohol is a disinhibitor, so you know, as soon as alcohol sits in the driver's seat, people are even less equipped to control their behaviors, and that's what happens. So I've seen a number of clients who only gambled under the influence of drugs and alcohol, who didn't find themselves using gambling at all under any other circumstances. And as Nerilee was saying, you know, once people are under the influence of alcohol, they're even less equipped to control how they behave, and their anger or whatever is troubling them is more likely to run rampant, and very problematic behaviors emerge. So yeah, I completely agree with everything that Nerilee said.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add that it certainly was true in my experience that alcohol made gambling worse, and gambling increased the use of alcohol because it's in the same place. And to go to venues when they had free alcohol, and they did it often, they would you got to know which venue had free alcohol at a particular time, and you know, it was only for an hour, but you could get a few drinks in an hour, and then you were there for hours and hours and hours. And even the free coffee, it sounds innocuous simple, but if I went there for free coffee and it was the most expensive coffee I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. In my experience as well, my husband was struggling with alcohol for many years, even before gambling was an issue. So I was exposed to his alcohol issues, and that's one of the reasons I was, moving from country to country. But it was really exacerbated when we came here after his gambling, because I would find bottles behind the, books, in the laundry, everywhere. This kind of experience I didn't have before. But also, as Anna said, it's a venue where you can get both. So, which is kind of, I guess, in a way unique in Australia. And as a person who wasn't exposed to gambling harm, but was exposed to a little bit of alcohol harm in my country, I was focusing more on seeking help on alcohol issues, and thought that once that is taken care of, gambling would automatically disappear. So again, that myth and that misconception made me go to Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous and all of that, and not look at gambling issues by itself. So yeah.
Thank
and
you.
gambling
Thank you.
is very, very secret. People who gamble are very, very secretive. I was. Nobody knew how bad the gambling harm was for me until I came out publicly and told the world.
Absolutely. And I just want to say we're going to have to wrap up now. We are over time, but thank you all so much. Everything you've said speaks to how complex this is, gambling harm and domestic and family violence, and the intersection. But also in terms of our response to it, we need to look at, at the whole situation. And the systemic response is critical. So having you with us, Dinny, Nerilee, Karina, Catherine, Judy, and importantly, the lived experience and your views, Chandana and Anna, have been, so important and really enlightened the conversation. There are so many more questions, but we won't get to them today. I just really wanted to say a big heartfelt thank you for respectfully listening to each other and talking about this very difficult and complex situation in a way that I think has been very helpful for everybody listening. So thank you. So we have come to the end of today's webinar, and I'd really like to thank everybody again. And a reminder that today's discussion has been very confronting, and there are support services as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. And tomorrow I'd just like to finalise is International Human Rights Day, and it is the final day of the 16 Days of Activism campaign. So you can look at our Twitter for a range of evidence-based resources. We will be tweeting the resources, the practice guide and the reports that Nerilee and Karina have so expertly authored for us on behalf of ANROWS. So thank you all again, and thank you to our audience. This is the last webinar for 2020, and I think we've ended on such a fabulous note. Really, really important views from a very, very expert panel. Thank you again. I'm Michelle Robinson, and on behalf of ANROWS, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.